Good afternoon, good evening, and how are you doing? It is, I still think it's still a beautiful Wednesday afternoon here in the beautiful city of Toronto. Now, for some of you, it's nighttime. Well, it's early evening. Some of you, it's morning, depending on when you're listening. If you're live on the replay, wherever you are, we welcome you tonight because we are going to have a great conversation. And I'm not going to delay too much. This is your time. As we get started, to get yourself a drink, get your snacks and notepad. I know some people are still frolicking outside because, the weather was really nice today and it's going to rain here tomorrow. But you need that notepad for the wisdom keys because you just never know where the wisdom is going to drop. And so, listening here, you hearing the sounds of, yes, Calabash. If you've turned into the Victory Speak show, Calabash is the group that I love playing, a little Caribbean jazz led by Anthony Pierre with, you're hearing Darren Shepherd on the steel drums. And yes, it's nice. You got to pick up the album. This song is called From Whence We Came. I love this song. So it is time for the Victory Speak Show Inspired Conversation series where iron sharpens iron. And that's you and me sharpening each other. And today is Wednesday. And I like to call it Wellness Wednesday. And I'm your host, Nicole Waldron, your voice of victory and your mental fitness coach. And guess what, folks? I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to inspire you to live a victorious lifestyle. And the Inspired Conversations is just one of the ways that I do this. I also do it through my advocacy. And you know what? This show has become about advocacy in one way or another. Whether it's through the people that we interview on a Monday or on a Wednesday, we just want you to live your best life and be informed. And so tonight, when I was reflecting, I had one of my guests back in Black History Month, and Canada is celebrating 25 years of Black history. And we said, you know what? To me, it's really the kickoff of Black history. We're not just limited to a month. And so tonight, we're going to focus in on the health and wellness of Black men. Come on, it's June, Father's Day. What a better time to focus in and hone in on the men. We're always talking about the women, and it's time to hone in on the men because without the men, we don't have the women doing well at all. And tonight, I feel like I won the guest lottery. I really do. These individuals are priceless. There is no number that one can put to their worth because of what they do. So let me start by telling you about them. First up is Donna Alexander. She's a social worker with a specialization in addiction and mental health. She currently serves on the Equity and Inclusion Council at the Department of Psychiatry and is also an adjunct lecturer at the Factor. Oh my God, Donna, I should have asked you this before I said it. In Wintash Facility, Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto. Donna currently serves as Vice President of Black Mental Health Canada and serves as an advisor on the Pathways to Care project for Black youth. She previously served as the Vice President of the Black Health Alliance and was a member of the Black Experience in Healthcare Initiative at Cyanide Health System. She facilitates training for staff at community-based agencies on factors relating to concurrent disorders and cultural safety in clinical practice. Next up on the Victory Speak stage is a guy I have known for a hot minute, and we met in the media space. Paul Bailey is a strategist, an urban planner, and interim executive director at the Black Health Alliance. Paul has spent the last decade designing interventions focused on health and well-being, community violence, mental health and addictions, and the social service sector as it relates to improving outcomes for Black children, youth, and families. His practice is currently focused on social planning, health equity, and addressing the causes of neighborhood distress and inequality. Now, that's just a little bit about Mr. Paul Bailey because he does a whole lot more. And the third, but not last, he's last but not least, is Asante Haughton. He is a mental health advocate devoted to changing the world. He is focused on amplifying the stories of everyday people to illuminate gaps in the system while working to build bridges between community members and policymakers in order to find solutions to challenges together. Asante is the co-founder of the Reach Out Response Network, an organization advocating for non-policy led mobile crisis emergency response. He is also a two-time TEDx speaker and a CAMH difference maker, awarded with the distinction of being one of the top 150 mental health influencers in Canada. Listen, and there's more to him, because when he is not speaking and advocating, he is designing and managing, facilitating peer support training programs at Stella's Place, which is a youth mental health service in Toronto. And let me tell you, last but not least on his resume is he has a web show. He's hosting Cypher, which turns peer support stories into original songs by Juno nominated musicians. Like, when do you people sleep? When do you sleep? So, listen, without further ado, I am going to bring to this awesome Victory Speak stage and platform these awesome people. Okay, let me just find a round of applause before I can bring them up here. All right, we're gonna bring them up. We're gonna bring them up. We're gonna bring them up. We are gonna bring them up live and direct. Woohoo! Woo! I won the lottery, y'all. Look who I have up here. My God, my God. What a day it is. What a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
It is a beautiful day outside, though, isn't it?
It is. I went for a walk early this morning, stood up on the top of the hill where I could see the bluffs, so it was a beautiful day watching, but I could tell the weather's changing. The water was a little darker, but the birds were having a heck of a time. How's your day going, Donna?
Good.
Just good? Just good, Donna? Just good? Okay.
It's been a long day, but, good.
Yeah, I know you have really long days. And what about you, Mr. Bailey, Dr. Bailey? Just not going to be a doctor. How are you, Dr. Bailey?
Never that. Like Donna, it's been a long day. I've been up since about 5 a.m., but happy to be on the show. I know we've been talking about it for a while, so ready to jump into the conversation.
And Dr. Haughton, I'm calling you all doctors tonight because in the space that you're in, you need your honorary doctorates. I'm just calling it out there. Somebody better give you your honorary doctorates. How are you, Asante?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been a long day. We don't sleep, as you know, Nicole. So, we're just trying to do our best out here and trying to improve the community. So, one day at a time, I'm doing all right.
Awesome. So, Donna, and I think I look frozen on the screen. So, hopefully, my internet is not a little whack tonight because I got you on here. It just would. But I hope you're all seeing and hearing me well. So, Donna, tell us a little bit about what is SAPACCY and what you're doing when it comes to Black mental health.
Well, SAPACCY, the Substance Abuse Program for African Canadian and Caribbean Youth, which is a community program that was founded in the community, but transitioned from the community since 1998 to CAMH. And basically, it's a program with a mandate to provide mental health and addiction services to Black youth. And so that's basically what we do. Within with a special focus of providing culturally safe, culturally relevant care from an Afrocentric perspective. So that's what makes us different. I suppose that's what's different about us, is that we don't try to provide service in a race-neutral, colorblind way. Is that the issue of race and the context of race and racism and racial trauma factors very prominently into care for Black youth. So basically, that's what we do. We do other things, but within that context, but a lot of advocacy, community work as well, to support the work that we're doing.
Thank you so much, Donna. And if you see Google on my screen tonight, it's because my computer and Wi-Fi is acting up on my end, but I can tell that we are still live and going well. So, Paul, if you could tell us a little bit about, what you're doing in your space at the Black Health Alliance.
Well, really quickly, the Black Health Alliance is a organization based in Toronto, and most of our work focuses currently on Ontario and Southern Ontario, but really have a mandate to support communities across the country. In the mental health space, currently we're kind of in the space of, we don't deliver frontline services. What we're looking to do is find all the opportunities that we can to increase access and remove barriers to mental health and addiction services for Black children, youth, and their families. So some of that is advocacy, advocating for increased support for programs like SAPACCY. Some of that is working with service providers, black-led and quote-unquote mainstream or white, to build their capacity to better serve diversity of Black youth. And then really just a lot of systems planning, thinking, doing the engagement work to understand, in present day, across different cities in the province of Ontario, what are the needs of Black youth and how are those changing and how are we responding? I'll leave it there.
You guys are doing some serious work out there. And Asante, you in several spaces, and you got reach out response, you got Stella's Place, you got your own advocacy going on, you got this thing. Tell us about these different entities that you're putting your hat into, that big hat behind you. I'm going to say hat into.
The hat don't fit me no more. But yeah, first thing, I guess, Reach Out Response Network. We came together as an advocacy agency, and our goal was to not have police as first responders for mental health and addictions crisis. When they're, call 911, most times police is what show up. So what we're trying to do is have mental health workers, crisis workers, be the people show up. So we've been pretty successful in advocating for that. The city, starting in 2022, is going to have 4 pilots that will be essentially crisis teams that you call the number, and instead of police, if you have a mental health crisis, this is the team that's going to show up. So it's a pilot stage. It's going to be in the pilot stage, so there's still a lot of work to do. But pretty happy about that. Stella's Place, generally, we are a mental health service hub, serving youth age 16 to 29. What I'm personally involved in is something called the Community Healing Project, which is actually a City of Toronto initiative, but in partnership with Stella's Place and a lot of other agencies around the city. And what we do is we are trying to end the cycle of violence by helping young people process trauma. So we recruit young people from a variety of different communities around the city. Then, me and my team, we run them through a 12 weeks of training to, process, some of that stuff, but also provide them with skills to then be able to facilitate their own peer groups where, young people can get together and talk about the things that they've experienced so they can start processing rather than bottling things in or, being either self-destructive or destructive toward others. I do the web show Cypher. We take caregiving stories and we turn them into songs. You can find that at www.storiesforcaregivers.com. A variety of different things. So, I'll leave it there for now, and let's see what else comes up in conversation.
So I want to challenge the three of you to let's have a conversation of what you are seeing happening in this space now. We have the pandemic and we have, Black men in crisis for different reasons. And if you can each share with me, what are you seeing with Black youth and Black men in this space, and what's happening with their health, and particularly their mental health, because their mental health affects their overall health. So whoever wants to go first.
I'll jump in because sometimes I get anxious waiting. So I'll jump in. And, a thing that I've been experiencing over, the last couple of years is having mothers call me and say, I need help with my son. And they're usually in that 14 to 16-year-old range. And, the mother is generally are seeing issues and challenges that their children are facing. They don't want to do nothing. They're, this, and the school is falling off. All they want to do is play video games or be on the phone or what have you. Social connections are falling off. What do I do? So I've been getting a lot of those, calls lately, which I think speaks to a lot of what, we see in the community through things like the Community Healing Project, which is that there's a lot of young people, young men in particular, who don't really have, an outlet or that comfort and that safety, but they're experiencing a lot of things, but no one's really supporting them to process and understand and identify what they're going through. So then, they either find escapes in, things like social media or video games or what have you, or they find other behaviors that they get involved in as a means of coping. So I'll leave it there for now. I don't want to say too much. We just started. Donna, Paul, you probably have more experience than me working on the front lines these days. So
I'm sure Donna does. One quick thought on that piece around Black youth in particular, and then maybe perhaps something on Black men, is I think the pandemic, the issues around racial trauma with the killing of George Floyd, and the other pieces have had like a profound impact. I remember having a conversation with somebody from the Minister of Education, and she was explaining that there are thousands of students actually that are not registered, so they're not in school learning, and they're not in online learning, and they don't necessarily know what's happening with these young folks. And I think you can assume or kind of intuit, given that we're talking about the city of Toronto, that a significant portion of those are Black students, Black youth. And so for me, I'm worried about what because education and the peer group and all that stuff is a huge protective factor for folks' mental health, and actually is a big predictor for what the health and well-being is going to be over their lifetime. And so worried about what the dislocation from COVID and the racial piece, again, with no spaces to process, and from what I've seen, no strategy from the education system or the government to say, okay, like this is how we're going to work through this with these young folks. I'm worried about what that means for themselves, and I think we could extend some of that same conversation to Black men. One of the things that I've been talking about recently is not Black men in isolation, but Black men as part of the community, or Black men as part of the family, or that ecosystem, if you will. And so, what does it mean? Again, with the pieces around COVID, there's a lot of folks that are struggling with income and food security, and like where they're gonna house themselves and take care of their kids, and the impact that has on folks' mental health. In addition, against the racial trauma piece and what that means. Worried about what that means for Black men who are in the household and maybe don't have all the supports that they need to process and work through, the strategies to get out of the situation that they're in, or to manage the situation that they're in, and process the emotions, and then the impact that then, in turn may have on Black youth. So maybe a long roundabout way of saying is, the mental health of Black men, Black parents, it's connected to the mental health of the Black youth. And I think we're all going through a ton of things that, it's important that we take stock of and think about how we respond. Donna? Waiting.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if we're being honest, when it comes to Black men, Black youth, Black boys, emerging adults, we're already vulnerable. So from a gendered analysis, right, they were already vulnerable. I mean, most of the, if you look at it within the context of trauma and what's been happening in terms of the kind of things that cause or precursors to trauma, right? So yes, we talk about gang and gun violence. We talk about homicides, increased rates of suicide. So, but those were just baseline, unfortunately. And now you have the pandemic, and what the pandemic has done, it's made all of those things much worse. So yes, you have the income security. So what we're talking, you have all of that you mentioned, Paul. But fundamentally, what we're talking about is that with Black men, there's so many threats to the mental health of Black men. There's so, when you look at it, right, like with every single system you have that are hostile to the health of Black, starting with Black boys, Black children, right? And starting maybe from the time they're 11 or 12. I have 11, 12-year-olds that are like, they're already over 6 feet tall, right? So I can look at them and I can tell that they're children, right? And I know they're children. But when they move around in this society, they're seen as threats, right? So they're seen as threats, they're perceived as threats, and they're treated as such, right? And this is, so the risk for Black boys, for Black men starts so much younger. And so to some extent, Black females are somewhat insulated. I've been driving in Toronto for how many years? I've never been pulled over, right? But yet my men folk, a lot of times, even some of them that are visiting or from out of town have been pulled over. Some of them, I've just been walking on the street with a bag, with maybe a basketball in the bag, and I've been pulled over because maybe you fit the description of or something, right? And so there's just elevated risk for black boys, for Black men. The risk have always been elevated. I was talking to a 15-year-old who lived in a building, and he was saying to me that there's a pool, there's a sauna, there are all of these things, but he said he's never gone there. Mm-hmm. Remember I was telling you, Nicole, the last time?
Yeah.
And he said, has anybody ever said to you not to go there? And he said, no. And I said, but how do you know not to go there? And he said, Miss, I just know not to go. And I said, but how do you know not to go? And he said, Miss, I know not to go.
He already doesn't feel safe.
Yes, because he knows if he goes, then people are going to get up and they're going to leave. Similar to my friend, a friend of mine who was on the subway and offered this woman a seat. And she said, no. And he got up and he said, no, I insist. And she said, no. And then a white man got up and offered the seat, and she took the seat. And he was devastated. He was telling me he was absolutely devastated, right? Because he didn't even, at that time when he was doing it, the fact that she wouldn't take the seat from him as a Black man, it just never registered. So all of these micro and macro aggressions, right?
Yeah.
But,
so go ahead.
Yeah, I like that you bring up that point, Donna, because I think that gets overlooked sometimes. I think there's a lot of talk about violence in the terms of physical violence and shootings and things like that. But I think that just ongoing psychological violence, the accumulation of that day after day after day, it eventually, can erode your psyche and also your self-esteem, right? And when I was talking about those mothers who call me with their sons, it's always in that same age group, that age group where we start to have a hyper awareness of where we fit in the world, 14, 15, 16. So for me, it's with everything that you're talking about, Donna, it's no surprise to me that this is when the young men are really struggling, as you realize that wherever you go, whether it's a sauna or the subway, even if you're trying to do everything right, the world is still hostile toward you, right? I have so many stories about that, but I mean, Nicole,
and I think, and that is the thing. It's how do we get people to understand? As you sit, Donna, you're sitting dealing with the Black men as a woman, and you're seeing the trauma, and then Paul and Asante, you are both in the space of experiencing that trauma yourselves. Like, how are you? When Donna brought up the fact that you're being pulled over just as a Black man, whether you're visiting or not. What is it doing to the psyche of Black men in just that space alone? Just driving while Black, walking while Black, getting up while Black. What is that doing to the mental health of our Black men? Oh, Asante, you blew.
I mean, it's bad. What else can I say about it? Like it's deleterious, as they say. And that's freaking me up. But I guess there was a point in my life where I just didn't want to leave the house, and it was because I didn't really want to deal with the outside nonsense on a day-to-day. Just let me go to school, come home, and handle my business, right? Especially because where I was raised, it was like, there was the temptation or the provocation of the street life, but then also, the other parts of the world weren't safe for me either. So where do I find safety, right? If I can't find safety anywhere, where do I go?
Paul, I see you unmuted yourself. Go.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any coherent thought on this, but Donna said one thing that there are so many threats to to black men and black men's mental health. And what Asante is talking about is, critical stages in particularly young men's life, where you start to develop your sense of self and your self-esteem, your sense of belonging, your social networks and the networks of support, etc. Key things. So one, key indicators when we're talking about things like gun violence and antisocial behavior. But so maybe that's a bit of a side point. But these are key factors that help determine how somebody is well, right? Their sense of belonging, their sense of self. I'm sure there's a social work term for all of that. The thought that I had was, with all of these threats, right? So whether it's getting pulled over, whether it's microaggressions on the subway or the bus, or with your teacher, or with your principal, or with the school resource officer, or with your neighbor, or that's starting to attack your sense of self. That's one piece, but particularly the things that are less passive and more like in your face. Like, so when you're getting pulled over, you have a bodily response to that,
Mm-hmm.
right? When other things are happening to you on the road, you have a bodily response to that. I've had the privilege of being able to sit down and work with and talk to young people who find all of these creative ways to navigate their community safely. And so in order to not get pulled over by police on their way to or from school, they have to walk with the young girls from the neighborhood as a group and not walk on their own. And it's like that's a way of staying safe and protecting yourself from those police stops. What I'm in a roundabout way trying to get to is that the threats to your mental health, the threats to your wellness and your stability, the belonging pieces, also manifest in like physical health, your physical health and your response, right? We know that Black folks suffer from greater rates of diabetes and hypertension and other forms of chronic disease, more aggressive forms of cancer and all these things. And while sometimes it's there isn't a scientific study that says, okay, this causes that, but the correlations are there through the literature. The correlations are there through the experience. These experiences, as Asante said, are deleterious, right?
You guys are killing me with these big words.
I can't even spell it.
Right? They have a profound impact on your health, over time. And so I don't know if there's another point other than that it has a profound impact on your health, right? Your physical health. And so I think it's a profound thing when we look at, life expectancy, and we look at, things like that, specifically for Black men. And what I'm interested sometimes is like, where do we start? How do we even start to have the conversation? How do we even start to address those things? Where is the place of safety that we can create? I don't know.
And that is the crux of it. Where do we start? And Donna, I see you ready to jump in right there, because
Yeah, but the question you asked before, I think there's a word for it. It's called hypervigilance.
Mhm.
So I imagine, and based on what I see, and I know because I've been doing this for so long, that a lot of Black men live in a state of hypervigilance. You have to be. You don't know where the threat is coming from, right?
Right.
And so when you don't know where the threats are coming from, you always have to be constantly on your guard, right? And over a period of time, that takes a toll. Yes, it takes a toll physiologically, psychologically, mentally. And a lot of Black men start to develop anxiety. So and we're not even talking about older men. We're talking about young men, right?
Right.
I have seen, and so a lot of, there's so many Black men right now that struggle with anxiety. We wouldn't know it, because a lot of Black men that struggle with anxiety, what they do is that the things that makes them anxious, they just tend to avoid those things, right? So it becomes a game of avoidance. A lot of times we see Black men not wanting to do, or we perceive them as not having ambitious, not wanting to do these things, not being driven. We may think of them as being lazy if we don't know better, but not realizing that, yes, they have hopes, they have dreams, they had a vision for their lives, they had focus, they had direction, but that the anxiety is so much that it's getting in the way. Right? So the fear and anxiety is so much. that it literally it stops progress. So because it's difficult to start navigating, right, all of those spaces that you're seeing as a threat, right? So because if you're and this is the thing, when we talk about visibility, we talk about invisibility, right? Black men are invisible in the worst kind of way.
Yes.
When black men, I mean, black men, when it comes to black men, I mean, people will go places. If black men are the boss or they're in charge or they're working, people just look right past them.
Mhm.
Don't even see them. They can be totally invisible, right? Where black men function and occupy spaces where they're in positions of power, they're doing good or they're doing well, they become invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Where, but they're always visible when it comes to bad things. Always visible when it comes to bad things.
And it's visible and visible. They're invisible, and you're so right. I love how you put
Visible
that
in the worst kind of
out.
way, most often, and visible in the worst kind of way. So it becomes a non-win a situation you can't win.
So I'm gonna take a slight pause and let you see what's happening in the comments here, because and everybody who's live and on the replay, thank you so much for joining us. You're joining us from, some of you on YouTube, some of you on Facebook. I'm gonna give you your flowers. Paul Joan Pierre says, "Good to see you, Paul, and working hard as usual for the community."
Big up.
Let's give you your flowers. Um, Teaching our kids about racism who are young under 12 has been difficult. And Serena's tuning in from Washington. Mental health support for our Black boys and girls is so important. Thank you all for being here. And Ann Pottinger is saying, "Donna, thank you. Good description. Hostile systems." And when we were referring to Black men driving, Joan says that it's so true. I've been driving for 45 years in this country and never got pulled over. And I have driven some cute looking cars.
Only women say cute, right? Cute looking.
Cute looking cars. So Deborah has a question. How do we teach young men not to internalize it? Create safe spaces at home as a mom. So your home is a sanctuary, but when they go out there, how do we create these safe spaces? Is there a way to create these safe spaces and help them not to internalize it, so they don't walk with this anxiety that has been, I mean, we know it's something systemic that we're dealing with. So how do we help them to live in the system that has been created?
For me, I think the biggest thing is creating a different narrative, right? So, I grew up in a household where, there's Black history posters everywhere all the time. So the narrative I had of myself was different than the narrative that the world had of me, right? I mean, that didn't mean that the world's narrative didn't impact me. I'm not saying that, because that would be lying.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it gave me a little bit of a shield so that things didn't hit me as hard as maybe they hit my friends who I've seen, go to jail or become involved in the streets where I stayed in school, right? So for me to have that little bit extra was one of the things that really helped me. Even now to this day, sometimes I have conversations with my friends, and there are some things that I know about, Black history, and I'm not like a historian by any means, but I have a little bit, right? That I'm surprised that they don't know about themselves and where they come from, and that just, it hits me, because I'm like, wow, how come there's no one in your life to give you a positive narrative about yourself, and not the narrative that the media, the world, people on the subway, whoever, will want to give us. So I think that's the first thing. And the second thing, and something I've tried to create in my household, having children now, is stability. Because, for me, when we talk about the anxiety piece, Donna, you probably saw me nodding my head a lot.
Yeah.
So the anxiety piece was strong for me. And it's because I didn't have a safe space outside, and I didn't have a safe space at home. And, it wasn't like there was abuse at home or anything like that, but there was instability. And that instability looked like food insecurity. That instability looked like a father that was in and out of my life. That instability looked like my mom experiencing health issues. That instability looked like, just my environment and my community. So there was just instability everywhere all the time. And I would have these random, just life exploding tragedies happen to me about once a year. and I would just never know when they happen. So eventually, you just feel like they're happening all the time. Right?
That was there, right there, Asante, a bing, bing moment. And I even think of myself as a mom and then as a single parent, that you don't realize that something that, whether it's the food, whether it's the job, whether whatever it is, that can, and I think it's not even whether you're single or married, it doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
What can show up as instability in a young person's life that we are clueless on? And I think this is something that everybody needs to take away, that what is it in your space is creating that unstable feeling in that young person, and how do you even see when they're feeling unstable, because it's something they have ruminating in the recesses of their mind.
But even even I think sometimes the way that we parent, and obviously parenting is affected by other life stress. So I'm not at all blaming parents, but one of the challenges I had with my mom, and she probably be fine with me saying this, is that she was angry a lot when I was young, and she was angry because of her life circumstances, right? And there was no outlet for her. So I didn't know what was going to be a good day for her and what was going to be a bad day. I didn't know what day I was going to cuss out because I didn't throw out the garbage, or what day that was okay and I could do it tomorrow, right? So it was this, and so even the way that we show up, we have to try to provide even the emotional safety and the emotional stability, because I mean, that was my main entrance into the world of this how people are. So then I walk into the world and it's like, for me, everyone's unpredictable, because my mom was unpredictable based on, I didn't know if she had a stressful day or not. And that's not her fault. That's because, she wasn't being supported properly. So this is how things become cyclical, right? So, I can now go out and, who knows what I'm doing to my kid, to be
Yeah,
quite honest,
yeah.
right? But I'm trying my best to be, you can expect the same thing in the household and from me, generally on a day-to-day basis. And when I'm not okay, I talk to my kid about it, and I say, hey, sorry, I just did that thing. That's not you. That was me being stressed out about this meeting I had at work. And, that's why I was so explosive in this moment when generally I'm more even keeled. So just those kind of things. Sorry, Paul. I feel like I'm taking up all your space.
No, no,
No,
no.
you're,
This,
you're,
this
dro-
this is why the conversation has to happen, because it's so robust. Go
you're
ahead,
you're
Paul.
dropping knowledge and I think perspective. And, again, I don't know if I have any coherent thoughts about this, but a few different things. So the question was around, and some of the comments was around this idea of like safe spaces. And I don't know that exists in the way that people think it
Mm.
does for Black men, even at
And
home.
Donna and Asante are agreeing with you profusely.
There are dynamics to that. I think what Asante was saying, though, just around the piece around instability, is actually really profound, right? So, if we look at the systemic factors, right? Again, back to some of the stats, we know that Black families are more likely to live in intergenerational poverty, more likely to experience food insecurity and housing insecurity. And when that Black adult male and female have are among the highest in terms of like unemployment, and this is like across the board. So when you start to pile some of these things together, the instability that Asante is talking about is actually like a structural issue, right? That
Mhm.
plays on the household in a real way. So Google ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Nadine Burke Harris has a good TED talk about it, right? But these ACEs, when you start to all of the things that Asante listed, when you start to pile these things up again, it has a profound impact on focused health. So and I think it's hard because you can't. People are only sometimes navigating the world as parents. When I think about my parents when I was young, I'm 30 now. My mother was 30 when I was about probably 8 or 10. I'm trying to think about the tools that I have now. If I had 10-year-old children, how I would be navigating those same kind of situations. So you only have the tools that you have. And so I think, the conversation that we need to be having around creating spaces or safer spaces is really one of like, what does this mean for Black men in particular? What does this mean for community? I know last point, Dr. Susan Archie in McMaster at McMaster, she has some research that shows that communities that are basically in ethnic enclaves, so where you have Black communities or other communities that are tied together and strong, you have less incidence of mental health distress, right? So there's a whole bunch of factors that causes that. But there's in what Asante was talking about, and I think what Donna was talking about before, there's a whole bunch of risk factors, right? So things that put things at risk, but there's a whole bunch of protective factors, right? And that's that community space, that space where people feel belonging and connection, is one of those huge things. So for me, the conversation, and maybe I'm being a bit too academic about it, but it's like, what are those protective factors? Where is the opportunity to you know, as Asante was saying, you're going through all these things, but how do you process? Right? Because you're going to face the instability. You're going to face different, you know, pieces in your life, but like, we have to figure out how to support folks' natural resilience and give them the tools to continue to build and strengthen it. You know, so sorry, go ahead.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, man, jump in. Before
the age of 21, let's say, how many Black male role models did you have in your life?
You know, so aside from my father and like family, I don't know that I had explicitly identified Black role models in my life in that kind of way. I never had a Black male teacher until like the last grade 12 kind of thing.
Did you have a Black man that you could go to and speak to when you have any kind of problem or something like that?
Oh man, up until today, I deal with that stuff myself.
And that's what I'm talking about, because I don't have that either.
So you see, Donna has just sat up now, and I'm just gonna let Donna sit up here because you see, I'm sitting here, and my heart is breaking more than it normally breaks. People always look at me and go like, you know, why do I advocate for men? Because one, I have a son, but I recognize that if our men are not safe, are not healthy, are not well, and especially our Black men, we're in trouble. And we are in trouble. We are in a Black male crisis. And nobody is really, we're talking about it in these silos, and we have to really come together. And, you know, when you said, you know, what is the solution? Paul, you said, what is the solution? I mean, we must have hope because we've come far. We not haven't come as far as we need to come, but we've come far. The fact that we can even have these conversations, the fact that you guys are working in these spaces and still doing it, and you know, even the fact that you're even willing to sit here tonight, and I'm going to give you I'm going to give you your flowers because, you know, as the Americans would say, we give you your flowers, right? Brooke Chambers says, thank you for this conversation. Thanks to me, yes, but great. But it's Asante, Donna, and Paul. I love all your comments. And Brooke works in the space. She knows this space well. You know, we have to come back together as a community to find some solutions because our men are dying. Our men are dying internally.
And not just physically.
It's an internal death is what I'm talking about. That internal death. And then, I mean, let's even go to just a little bit of some of the stats. Men commit suicide more than women, and I don't think people realize that. And we have a lot of, and I don't know what you guys are seeing, especially in Status Place, Black Health Alliance, and SAPACCY, but in the terms of suicide and what are you seeing in terms of what is happening to our young men? Whoever wants to jump in, Donna, go ahead. I see you're ready. You're sat up in the chair.
But I mentioned it before, the increased suicide rate among Black men before we had protective factors, right? But I think, you know, over a period of time, the more we assimilate, the more we're race neutral, the more we lose our protective factors, and the more these things happen. I'm on a crusade right now in order to really say to Black parents that we need to racially social. I'm doing some work now with some parents, and it's breaking my heart because I didn't realize the extent to which parents did not know the need to racially socialize their children, especially their Black male children. The reality is that we could have a young Black boy and he could go to kindergarten, middle school, high school, university, and not even have one Black teacher. That's the reality, right? do not see themselves reflected, right? And so now sometimes we're raising men, and it's, I mean, yes, there are women around, but a lot of times it takes a man how to show a man how to navigate those
Exactly.
systems,
Yes.
right? When I had my, and I've been doing this work for a while. I had my student David, and David did his master's thesis on conversations he had with young men, and it was even eye opening to me in terms of the stuff that concerned them, the way they talk, all of these different fears, and that they had. But the reality is that when we're raising children, Black men especially, without the context of not seeing themselves represented, that yearn for that positive Black male figure because they don't have it. I mean, the school system right now is dominated by middle-aged, middle-class white women.
Yes.
The child welfare system is dominated by middle-class, middle-aged white women. No matter what systems you find, they're usually dominated by middle-class, middle-aged white women that cannot relate to our boys, right? They cannot relate, and most often, their instinct is to be quite punitive. So whereas you and I we'll engage with boys, we'll see them doing something. To us, it's like, healthcare systems, whatever the systems are, right? They say, so we don't even take them on. We let them cool off because we know. But yes, we don't see it as a challenge. We don't see it. We know that most of the time, if they're acting up, whatever, they're just blowing off steam. We're not going to take them on. We'll just,
and we do it as women too, because as Black women, this is how we express ourselves. We get very loud and passionate.
So when we see Black men, and to us, we don't, if they're whatever they're doing, we don't get immediately threatened and say, oh, they're hostile, they're aggressive, they're dangerous. That's not a lot of us, that's not our natural instinct, because culturally, we know better. We know that they have to do that. But in other spaces, they're not allowed to do this, especially in the school system. And this is why so many of them are getting expelled and so many of them are getting suspended. And when you do that, then that's when you create this pipeline. And so we talk about, these numerous risk factors that just keep piling up. And of course, all it would take is one male teacher to take that child aside. But our boys don't have that luxury. And a lot of young men like Paul, like Asante, have to grow up without seeing themselves. And how do you navigate how do you know the sense of self, right? That comes from not seeing yourself. How do you develop healthy self-esteem, self-respect, sense of self when you don't see it? You don't see yourself reflected.
And you don't have the people to go to that you feel safe with. And it's interesting that, Match put up, our challenge is that a lot of Black men will not speak about it because they look at it as a sign of weakness. Yes, but what we're even recognizing now, in addition to that, is what Donna and Paul and they have been saying. It's not just about a sign of weakness. It's bigger than that. It's that they're not safe to even share what you're feeling. From what I am hearing, it's not even just about weakness. And I think this is, when I'm listening to this, as I listen to this conversation, I am seeing that the different conversations that we really need to have in it is understanding why Black men communicate the way that they do, and how they are so misunderstood by Black women, by white women,
and the world.
by the world. We need a conversation just on communication, because, if I were to look at Paul and Asante right now, depending on which lens I look out of it, Paul have his afro, Asante have his dreads, and, the world is going to look at them with assumptions, right? And you always feel like you have to probably prove yourself.
That's why I didn't wear the hoodie tonight. But,
yes.
To your point, Nicole, and to what Donna and Asante are saying, I think to go back to the question around like what we see. So, I'm not in the clinical space where I see a lot of the pieces around, folks dying by suicide, but working in a space of violence or community violence and gun violence and these pieces, there's a and it's kind of like it's the waves, if you will, or the rings outside of that. There's a whole bunch of self-destructive behavior that I think is rooted in some of the stuff that we're talking about, whether that be, the gun violence piece, or whether that be, substance misuse, if you will, or other pieces that are connected to that. And I think like we're often not paying attention to all of what's happening, and all of what's happening again specifically with young Black boys and men, until it gets way too late in the process, where some of these things are kind of entrenched. The flip side of this to me again is back to the community piece and the protective factors, mind you. So I came up in this kind of conversation with folks like Brother Sankofa and other folks around like the Afrocentric thing, right? And for me, Afrocentrism is important as like a protective factor and something to root yourself in. But for me, it's how we think about it. So I'm not necessarily like bought into the whole like need for drumming and kind of West African version of Afrocentrism. But I think that knowledge of self that really helps ground folks, things like rites of passage, again, not in necessarily just the traditional way that we think about it in the city, but these things were there for a reason, right? Where we are intentional about creating a space where young men can have these conversations, can learn from an elder to do X, Y, Z. I think we have to look to some of those things and not do it in a way where we're forcing young people, folks younger than myself and Asante, to kind of go through what we think, culture is, or how they should orient themselves, but respond to kind of where they are with that same principle of rites of passage. One last point is, again, think back to the piece, and Donna then would know, like, and probably yourself, Nicole, things like Saturday school, where you come out of the TDSB and you're in a space where, yes, it's about learning and it's about excellence and it's about school, but it's also about community. It's also about that different space. I didn't go to Saturday school, so I'm not being nostalgic, but what I think it's important that we get beyond the academic piece, get beyond the theoretical piece, and like, what have we done recently? What have we done perhaps in the past? And how might we incorporate some of these things in just the day-to-day pieces? Like that Saturday school thing, I think would have profound impacts for many things around the community piece, around the belonging, the self-esteem. There's a lot of pieces here that I think we have to, start to work through and weave in order to kind of, start to peel back the layers and create those spaces that some folks, or safer spaces that some folks have been talking about. But I'll leave it there.
And Brian says, the Black psychological culture was broken and there's a void that was there naturally. It's terrible, and it's so true. And that's what you speak to. And, it depends on where you grew up, because if you grew up in the Caribbean, depending on, if you grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, you grew up around Black role models all the time. You have a prime minister that's Black. You're accustomed to that. Like, that's where I grew up. I grew up into a different space. And when my son came here, my son is born here, so he grew up into a different space and a different experience. And I think sometimes, and this conversation is so supercalifragilisticexpialidocious that it needs so much breadth and width and depth to have it, because I think that not recognizing and not having grown up here like you, Paul and Asante, I would not have known as a Black mother growing up in a country where I saw Black. That's what I grew up around, not recognizing what he was experiencing. And this is the part of the education I think we also need to do for families, because when you talk about it, the psychological violence that Black men are going through from young that we don't even know. Asante, you spoke to those safe spaces and the stability, that we are not even conscious of, that we may not, even just by some simple things that appear, well, I'm just coming home. But for a Black child, he feels unsafe and he feels unstable, and we don't realize that this is what we're grooming. So it seems that we almost need like a re-education of raising the Black, not just the Black, more importantly, the Black son. We need to do some, back in the day, like, when we had what did they call it? They had all sorts of parenting classes. They had home ec. They had all these different classes when you were growing up in the Caribbean. I don't know about you guys growing up here now, but and I'm very cognizant of your time, because I know you've been up early. All three of y'all have been up early, and you're working late into tonight. So I'm going to give you some comments. We're going to wind up with some thoughts, and
Could I say something,
maybe
bro? Could I jump in? I've been
you could jump in because you're gonna jump in because I listen. I am prepared to stay here for another hour. I just try not to make y'all fall asleep and be cognizant of the time because
nah, man.
we know this needs some depth. So Asante, you go for the goal, my
You
friend.
know, I guess I just want to be really transparent right now because I feel like that's, you know, kind of what we're trying to create sometimes too. This is a very painful conversation for me. And I have mental health conversations all the time, and I don't feel like the way I'm feeling right now. Like,
Mm,
this is a very challenging conversation for me to be a part of. And there's a part of me right now that kind of wants to break down and the tears come out or whatever, right? And it's painful because when I hear Paul talk about, yeah, I had my father and my uncles, and I didn't have none of that. And then like for me, like my experience growing up was so isolated, literally and figuratively. Like it's and going back to Paul talking about aces and all of these things, like it's so challenging to, if you haven't gone through it that way, to understand what that's like. So now my mission, as raising children, is that sense of belonging is really important for me, because while I have that now, I didn't have none of that growing up because I was a smart kid. And what they do with a smart kid is they start throwing you in all these different places. And in those places, you generally don't see yourself, either in the faculty or the students around you, right? So while as our home, everything was nice in my home was very black. But then I go into the world and it wasn't that way for me. Even if I was in a black school, they're still in the smart classes. That's where you find a lot of the non-black children in those classes, right? And those are the spaces where I was in all the time, and it's really hard to deal with those microaggressions and those things. So now, as a parent, and knowing that the landscape of Toronto as it is right now is very much that black people typically live in poorer neighborhoods, and and there isn't really like that much like of like a solid black middle class well-to-do community. And so where I am now in my life economically is somewhere between middle class and upper middle class. So I have decisions to make now about my where I live and how I parent, and I have to constantly think about the trade-off between living in safety or affluence that I can afford economically, but what would the cost be psychologically and emotionally for my son and my future children? So I've chosen to live in a lower income neighborhood where I could see more of myself and he can see more of himself, so that he can go to a school where he sees more of himself. Because I know what it was like for me in grade 7 and 8 when I went to the all-white school, and I hated it, right? And it wasn't because no one was running around calling me the N-word. It was deeper than that,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
And it was because I didn't see myself anywhere, right? So I wanted to make sure that he had the opportunity to see himself, and I've seen the impact it's made on him, to just how much more self-esteem he has now than he did before, where he was very timid before, and now he's very confident and he'll talk to anybody. And that happened in a span of 3 years, and or 4 years now that he's been living with me. And last year, in grade 6, yeah, he had a black woman teacher, and this year he has a black male teacher. And then there's another black male teacher in the school who's very involved in creating programming for the boys. And I've seen the impact that makes on him, and I'm very happy that I made that choice, but also have difficulty reconciling that his educational opportunity is less. His academic opportunity is less. And that's the trade-off for his emotional, spiritual, psychological sustenance, because of the way our system currently operates. And then I look at myself in the mirror and I see that, the academic piece for me was definitely very satisfied. Why I use words like deleterious. Right? but, but, but on the other hand, that psychological, emotional, spiritual connectedness and safety is still something to this day. I still feel like, do I have enough of that? Am I connected enough? Am I doing enough? Am I, in whatever it is, right? And it's because I didn't have enough of that growing up. And, to this day, like my elders are really, my mom really, and, some of the older heads I know from growing up. But I didn't have one black teacher, male or female, growing up. Not even a black professor in school taking, courses in Caribbean studies. Like, still.
Well, listen, Asante, I am.
UFT Asante?
Yeah, man.
That's why.
What was that called? What was that? What was that? I missed that line.
He said he intentionally went and chose Caribbean studies to see himself in school. Even then,
Mhm.
couldn't find what he was looking for. So I asked
Right.
him, he went to UFT. That's
Ah,
what happened.
Naturally.
I don't know that part of the system. You see, I'm still the Trini in me.
You're-
Asante,
you're too alum.
we, I thank you for being vulnerable. I thank you for sharing and being so transparent. And I think it's important that people see this because they see you doing the work. And sometimes we have to get in those spaces where we're not always on in that space, but we can be ourselves and our authentic selves. And Leo is on here. Leo Edwards is on here. And says, I can
That's my
literally feel
guy.
your pain, and thanks for your vulnerability. Deborah says, you made it despite what you didn't have, and I honor you, Asante. Big up yourself. You're gonna make us cry here, Deborah. I try not to cry on the people on them show, namely mine. Oh Lord. Okay, wait. I'm gonna bring up that comment in a minute. That comment is going to, I think, make everybody laugh. Um,
Can I say one more thing though? Sorry, just
Asante, what
the
did I tell
last
you
thing
at the
I'm gonna
beginning
say.
of this show? This is your show. I am just here as the steward. Okay.
Remember at the beginning I said I was tired. I wasn't gonna say nothing tonight. Here I am. But one of the things I think black men and boys really need that we are starved for is compassion.
Yes.
And I'll just
I'm
leave it
so
there.
glad. That, you see, you can't leave it there because that for me is the crux of the matter. And that's what I was referring to when I said that what do women need to see? What do men need to see? What does the world need to see? Because they see, I mean, I get frustrated just by looking at TV. When I look at BET here, for example, all I see are these shows that show black people as whatever. Like we have no nothingness to ourselves. We see, for lack of a better word, shows that just don't show our excellence and all that we are. Right? It's the same shows repeating time and time again. Black History Month is the same thing time and time again, and we're not showing the truth of the fullness of who we are as a people, and that is very hurtful. And so when you say that, listen, compassion is what we need so much. And especially when we talk about men and their emotion, black men and their emotion, we're so quick to judge, and we're not patient, and we're not kind, and we're not loving, and we're not forgiving. And don't get me because I might start swearing on my own show. Hold on, let me pull up a comment. Let me pull up a comment right here. Um, Joan says that's parenting 101, a conscious effort to give your sons the best foundations for survival. And you know what? I'll tell you, Asante, what I did was when I stopped, I was working for an insurance company, and the insurance company was folding, was an American company. And at that time, I decided to become self employed as an event planner. And then I was looking at my son, going on two, and like, I was like, I don't want him in this, just white colloquialism space. I wanted when he came home, daycare. I don't want him to have to go into those spaces. And I made some choices, and I know I sacrificed financially because I wanted to be there because it was just me. And I wasn't getting, the child support and stuff like that. In hindsight, sometimes I go, I wish I had, been a little more and said, no, you got to pay me a little higher, or I got to go back to the 9 to 5. But I thought I was providing a different type of stability by being home. That when he came home, he saw me, when he went out, yeah, he saw me. But you said something just now about the instability that he would have probably seen certain things where he thought he had to take care of me, and I wasn't aware of that. That was a bing bing moment for me. the things that we may be doing as parents that may be causing our children anxiety. I don't care what space you're sitting in, single, married, whatever you are, what can be causing your children anxiety, especially your black male children who are not showing their emotions. I am just loving it. But let me make you all smile a little bit.
But Nicole, just one quick thing. I think
Yes.
that point around where possible, protecting your children from instability is important. But I think it's also important not to overcorrect, where sometimes because children can sense things either way, right? So like you have to find a balance of not oversharing
Yes.
the information that your child can't process or handle. But
True.
it's important for children to understand like what is happening and like, you know, what's going on. It's also a learning moment around like how you're building your own life. I think, and perhaps Asante can talk more to this, but like part of the key there is like, what are the tools that you're putting in place to help your children or even yourself kind of process what those things are and to understand and like to stay grounded. But, you know, just one thing for me, because I think sometimes hiding everything from your children.
I agree.
I don't practice that.
I totally, and I like that. It's the tools, and I think that's one of the things I think we have to leave here with tonight is give some people some tools, you know, as well as the information that we're sharing. And I hope this is not the only conversation that we're sharing. But Brian had to make sure and we understood how to spell the word, right, and what it means, right. Say the word again. Say the word again, Asante.
Deleterious.
Deleterious, causing harm or damage. Right. Divorce is assumed to have a deleterious effect on children. My God, Jesus is Lord. Here tonight, I learned a big word. I thank you for, you know, for it. So we think about our winding thoughts and what we want to say and what we want to leave with. Um, I just want to even provide some context in so that people understand that Donna, when I think of SAPACCY and what the work that you're doing there, like, I mean, you probably, I know there's confidentiality and stuff, but what are the numbers like in terms of Black youth and men coming into the space? And you deal with youth, but coming into the space that you're seeing, and then you're cross populating at Black Health Alliance and other organizations. What are you seeing in terms of the numbers and Black men and their mental health?
Well, our numbers from males have always been higher. Historically, it is mostly been males. I think in the last 3 years or so, we're getting more females, but overall, it has always been more males, overwhelmingly. That's just because of need. That's just because, like I said, the young men are so vulnerable. I think to the point that that we're talking about, I think when you were talking about the lack of compassion, I think it's twofold. I think, well, I know that to a great extent, young Black men have really internalized. You know, if there's a young man right out there that say to me that he has not internalized all of these things, then I would suggest to you that would not be the truth. It's extremely difficult to live in this society and not internalize the negative messages as a young man. And so to a great extent, young men have internalized these messages, this racism, all of these negative messages, the troping, the judgment, the fear, all of this, right, become internalized. I think it's natural. I think we have to, from the time we're a young man or children, have to start socializing them in order to protect against the internalization that invariably will happen when they start to become older and they're no longer cute little boys running around. We have to start having the conversation with them, so that they know that we love them. We are parents, we love them, and we think they're special and they mean the world to us. But outside of that, in the community, that other people might not feel that way. We have to start preparing them from the time they're 3 or 4 years old, because in the absence, and not only that, but we actively have to start promoting Black pride and racial identity, and all, we have to go the extra step. What I see, which is extremely distressing to me, are some Black parents that are trying to raise children within this context, and we're trying to raise children in a race neutral way, and not really understanding the implications for this later on for our children, that we cannot raise them to be. Some of them, I've even had them in my chair and I've had to say to them, you realize you're not white, right? You realize you're a Black boy, right? You realize that you cannot do the things that your white counterparts do and get away with it, right? You realize that when you're in certain spaces and things go down, you have to leave, right? I have to be saying these things to them, because there's this idea that I was born here, I was raised here, I should have the same rights, I should have the same opportunities, I should have the same freedom as my white counterparts, and that's just not the reality. And so I have to have these conversations with them in order to protect and to preserve them. And those are some of the conversations that I wish some of the parents would have with their children, because that's lacking. And that's what I said when I said I'm on a crusade to talk to Black parents that yes, you need to racially socialize your children, because you're not living in a predominantly Black society, right? And so if that's not the case, it doesn't matter, because you know how many Black children I've seen that were geniuses, and then they get sent to all of these white schools and they get scholarship, totally lose their mind.
Yeah.
They were brilliant children. I have to say to some of the parents, take them out. I have to suggest to some of the parents, because the kids are so brilliant that they get picked on. I remember even one of my co-workers was saying to me that one of her clients said, oh, even the Black student is doing better than him. A white parent said, oh, but even there's one Black boy in the school and he's getting better grades. So those are the things. So where they've gone to these schools, full scholarship, $200,000 scholarship, all of these things, because they're geniuses, and totally lose their mental health.
And the psychological violence is
because brilliance does not protect you. If you have not been effectively racially socialized, brilliance does not protect you.
So we have to have something, and even a conversation on being racially socialized. That is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about, I just want to go back to the compassion piece for a minute, and I want to say to Asante and Paul, and I ask you this question: where would you see that the compassion should come from? Like, how can we be more compassionate towards you as Black men?
Everywhere. I mean,
give that one to Asante. Jump in.
That's you.
Right. My honest answer is I don't think compassion is enough. So I don't even want to answer that question. So give that one to Asante.
So is it that we have to come from? So maybe the word is we act with compassion, but we start from a place of understanding. We start from a place of knowledge and understanding, so that we are not that takes us from a place of judgment, because we judge the Black man.
I'll say this. I think folks need a toolkit with all of their accoutrements.
How old are you again, Paul?
Man, where are you? Accoutrements.
I haven't heard that word in a while.
And the toolkit is, and I'm sure we could all add pieces to it, but the thing around, so Donna's talking about preparing your children to navigate the world, what it means to be Black in the world. And my experience is that the majority of parents aren't actually preparing their children for what that means. So you grow up going to public school and you think that you are the same as all of your peers. And then there's a moment, a spark, where you realize that that's not the same, and it's devastating to who you are. And different people navigate that in different ways, but it's devastating to who you are. Sometimes it's 14, sometimes it's 18, right? And it's important to understand, like what that devastation then how that manifests.
because it's like it starts chipping away at you inadvertently
To
until
roles
like you
this
just
kind, yeah.
your sense of self is gone. How you understood yourself in the world no longer makes sense. Joan asked a question earlier in the chat that that she wanted us to answer about, kind of how do we navigate the world and driving in different people. I don't drive anymore, I take bus. But
I know I shouldn't laugh.
the amount of money I save on insurance, boy. Anyways, and gas. The point around the driving though, when I did drive, I did everything, right? So I wore trench coats. I went to certain stores. I had a certain look. My Yorkview parking pass was brightly
Hanging.
shining from my rear view mirror, so folks could see it. If the police are coming out their car, you can see it. I'm not like them. I am at York, and what you realize eventually. So I mean, this is the idea that I had. I need to perform in a certain way so that I won't be treated a certain way. When you realize that none of that matters.
None of that matters.
None of that matters. No.
The piece around how you navigate the world and like the hypervigilance that Donna was talking about, whether it's navigating my community at certain time of night or certain places, or it's police, everything has a strategy, everything has a plan. There isn't. I don't just walk through the place without considering, all of the dynamics, right? I don't do unplanned random things, and I think that's part of that conditioning.
I literally feel, Paul, as you said that, I literally feel like we need to have some family classes, especially for mothers, because we have a lot of single mothers raising Black sons, and they do not know how to equip their sons to navigate the space. Can I get an amen? If that's the truth. I literally, as I'm sitting here saying it, I think we have to do it, because if we don't do it and start it so that it continues, it may sound something simple, it may sound silly, but you made a really good point. How do you navigate and train? And what's the language that you use? And it has to be men teaching the class. It's not women teaching the class. And then the men have to teach the women how to deal with them in the space, even at home, how to deal with them with all the different challenges. My God, this conversation, it's bigger than I can even fathom.
Nicole, can I just finish just 1 second, Asante? The toolkits. There's a ton of different things, and I hope I would ask Donna to throw some more things in, but I wanted to just finish that thought real quick. The tools to process things. So Norman's asking a question around does childhood trauma.
I was gonna come to that. Yeah, go ahead. You can answer it.
Or does some of that stuff cause mental health disorders? And yes, it does. Right? Yes, it does. And the clinicians can go to a bit more into that, but disassociation is a thing. How that can manifest in things like psychosis is a thing, and that's why it's important to make sure that you're building that toolkit both for yourself as a Black man, but also for your children, that they have that sense of grounding, that they have those tools to process, whether it's the racial identity piece, or whether it's the skills and tools that help them to build empathy, the tools and skills that help them to build a sense of belonging and understanding. There are a ton of things that I think we need to have in our toolkits to make this thing work. And so just to tie it off here, this is why for me, like the compassion is necessary, because the compassion is it's like the real world that we're living in. And sometimes Black men just need a break, just a minute.
Yes.
Just a moment. Right. So but for me, it's like, I don't know. My natural reaction, Asante, when I was hearing that piece, is like, yo, compassion is not enough. Because when you get that moment done, the moment you're done that Heineken or the Red Stripe, and you smoke that split or whatever it is, and that moment's done, like you have to go back into it, right? You have to go back into it, and sometimes breaking down the barrier, and then having to figure out how to pull it back up is like it's too much. So I don't know, but sometimes for me,
but that's real though, and I think that's a problem that we have to keep breaking down the barrier and building it back up. When I refer to compassion, I don't just mean let's sit with our feelings and talk about it, but what I mean is compassion in the sense of understanding the situation, and so that we can understand it well enough that we give people tools, like you're saying, rather than blaming them, or having expectations but not providing people with the tools to meet those expectations, right? And I used to work in the school system, and one thing I find a lot was that there would be parents who were, they didn't give the children the tools when they were young, and then tried to give them the tools later, but by that time the kids won't receive them, right? And we're talking a lot about parenting, and I don't want to blame parents, because parents, most of them are really trying their best, right? you
And
know
I don't see you as blaming parents. I think you're
right.
right now. It's equipping and
But
educating us. Yeah,
that's it, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so for me, it's that piece. And Paul, as you're talking about the tools and the accoutrements,
I'm learning lots of new words tonight.
my mom used to use, I want you to cuss me out, but anyway, but as you talk about those tools and those different situations and how to navigate them, I realized that my mom gave me a lot of those tools from time, like entering kindergarten. Teacher say this to you. Here's how you respond. Principal say this to you. Here's how you respond. Here's the way you walk through the neighborhood. Don't go this way. Go that way. When the older, boys are talking to you and they're trying to groom you and bring you in, you have to recognize who those boys are, and you say hi and bye to them, and that's it. So I had all these tools
You were being socialized. I wish a lot of other parents would have the same discussion with their children. That's how you racially socialize children.
Right? And people are like, how did you grow up where you grew up? You never got arrested. You never got involved. And it's because I had these tools, right? You know what I mean? And it's not to say that they protected me from everything, but they protected me in situations that I saw, a lot of my peers were not protected. When the police officer, oh my God, don't get me started with police. The amount of times I've been stopped by police in my life, like countless. We would need all of our, fingers and toes to really count them, right? I'm 6'4". I'm pretty dark, so it's like just walking. And I was tall from young, like young. So the amount of time I've been stopped, but even then it was like I had the tools to, one, I knew what my rights were, but I also assumed that my rights would be violated if I were to talk about my rights in front of the police officer, right? So I mean, for me, it was like, how do I get out of this situation as quickly as possible, and always choose the answer to the question that will achieve that? Because the longer I stay in the conversation, is the more likely that harm can be caused to me.
And
Right?
that Asante, that is a big tool. Like, how do you, because our young people don't know how to navigate the conversations that they're having with one, adults, people in authority, and then the police, and they already feel this aggression towards them. But how do they have that conversation and not hit back when you want to hit back verbally, not physically, but you want to give back.
Well, for me, it was understanding when to, there's this whole thing about respect and disrespect. I had to understand in what situations I needed to defend my respect and in what situations I had to let it go. The police was disrespecting me. Sometimes I had to be kiss my teeth and just walk. You know what I mean? But if there's someone else in the neighborhood disrespecting me, that could be a thing where if I don't respond to that in that moment, that creates unsafety for me for the rest of the time I live in that neighborhood. So
Wow.
it's different.
It's knowing when to who you should answer, when you should answer. And look at it, Jonas saying is, Paul, Asante, I need to put some things into that toolkit for me when I'm addressing my nephews. I think we need to put together a toolkit, Black Health Alliance. No, still, funding. Yes, we need funding. So anybody listening live and on the replay and listening to the show, you are hearing the experts and people who are living with it from their own personal lives and from what they're dealing with in the world. And I mean, we're unpacking so much tonight. Um, it's when to do, when not to do, and it starts from now, from young, and then it's we haven't even touched the system. We haven't even touched the mental health system. We haven't even touched the police force. We haven't even we've just touched the tip of the iceberg on the things that we need to address Black men and their mental health. Because I think about relationships, how women need to treat men, and how to speak to their boys, how to communicate their boys. How are you feeling misunderstood? Because that's impacting your mental health. When it comes to depression, Black men go through a lot of depression, and Donna, you spoke about it earlier. They're hiding their depression, and they're becoming anxious, and it's showing up in ways that we don't understand. It may show up in aggression. It may show up in failed relationships. It's showing up in ways, this systemic trauma that we have been through from, well, back as slavery, as far as back as we can go. It's now, it's catching up. And yes, some people have been able to navigate the space, but at what cost? Because even as I listen to you, Paul, and Asante sit here, and Asante, you just so showed such vulnerability and transparency, just sitting in this space, sharing what you were feeling, and you're doing this work all the time. It's still affecting you. And I think people are not sensitized. They think, well, you know what? Asante is this, he's doing TED Talks. He's this person, he's that person. He's sitting down with Sophie Gregoire Trudeau doing an interview on Twitter. Paul's the interim executive director, la di da di da. But they forget that you're human beings with feelings. And you are Black men that once you walk out your house, you're not safe. And you have to deal with that every day as a truth. And that's one of the big takeaways from tonight, as your Black sons walk out the streets. And we can talk about the girls. Somebody else can do the show about the girls. It ain't gonna be me. I'm dealing with the Black sons, and I'm dealing with the Black males. They are not feeling safe. And if you need to make them feel safe, starting at home, and how can you make your young boys feel safe? And fathers need to listen to this. And so we need to, it's not about criticizing you, it's about equipping you so that you recognize that when your Black sons go out there, how are you dealing with your emotions? How are you dealing with your anxiety? How are you dealing with your depression? Is there mental health challenges or illnesses in your family that you're not talking about? You know, and I'm sure, Donna, you're probably like going like, that's a whole other conversation, that we're not dealing with our mental health. What are you seeing at Stella's place there, Asante, and you have the reach out response. So we're going to have each of you back if you're willing. And we're going to have some significant conversations, and maybe we'll just take a topic and just really just go into that topic. And it starts with a conversation, and I know we can't still serve all the world's problems, but um, I give this show to you, and let me hear your closing thoughts, what you would like, the community to know, the concerns you have, and the takeaways that you would love people to walk away with as you sat here for the last hour and a half. And it's all yours. What would you like to wrap up with? Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in. I think I'll end off with the toolkit piece. I think Joan, others, the most important thing, perhaps, and I learned this part from Donna, so I'm going to tease it, or amplify it. Let's say that's positive. The most important thing that you can have in your toolkit is to make sure that you have the tools that allow you to stay grounded. Right. So if that is the meditation or the thing that you do on a regular basis to hold yourself down and to keep yourself grounded, I think that's one of the most important tools. If it's a friend or a colleague that you connect with, that is really in touch with you, that can see when you need that support and can reach out and give you that support, perhaps it's that. I think the most important thing for Black men who are fathers, black young men who are coming up, I think, is to protect your own mental health, and one of those tools is to make sure that you have those pieces to stay grounded up. I'll leave it there.
All right, Paul is leaving it there. We're going to bring it back to who wants to go next.
I could go. I think, okay, so from my vantage point, what I see is that we have we have young men, young Black men. The irony is that this is a population that is really underserved. And part of the, so here it is. If there's ever a group of people that really need mental health support, would be Black men, right? But ironically, this is such an underserved group. And so we still have a long ways to go in terms of really dealing with the stigma relating to access and support for Black men. And we also have a long way to go in terms of really challenging this notion of Black strength. Because Black strength, yes, we're strong. Yes, we're resilient. Yes, we have the ability to resist. But oh my goodness, it's such a burden sometimes. Because what it does is that it prevents Black men from accessing support. And so, yes, Black men just put it in the little compartment. It's compartmentalized, and they go on and they do their things. And, not really being well. And it comes out in internalization and other ways. And so, when we talk about the state of Black mental health, yes, it's not a single story. There are a lot of young Black men out there that are doing really, really well. But on the other hand, there are a lot of young Black men that are really struggling through no fault of their own, because this environment is so extremely harsh for young Black men. It grow from the time they're off the bosoms, and they stop being cute, and so from the time they're 3 or 4 years old, the environment is so harsh for them to grow up in, like in so many numerous ways. And I think a lot of times we really, as a community, we really have to take that into consideration. And it's not about judgment, but, a lot of the work we have to do is saying, you know what, we really need to do more from the time our young men are really, really young, in terms of supporting them in order to really maintain optimal mental health.
Thank you so much, Donna. And Asante?
I didn't really want to go last because,
The last shall be first and the first shall be last, my brother.
Right. But, one thing, there's so many things I want to say. I think a lot of this conversation we've been focusing on, we've been taking our responsibility, as we should. But, Donna and Paul have alluded to it in various parts of this conversation. A lot of this stuff is rooted in systems. So I don't want to, sometimes I feel like in these conversations, we start blaming ourselves, the culture, this and that. But we have to also understand just the magnitude of the impact of things like slavery and the continuing systemic injustices that we see in our everyday lives that are embedded into every system that we live in Western society. So I want to make sure we could highlight that, so we don't internalize this as a failure of us, because it's not. It's a failure of a system that mistreats us, or some would say not a failure. But anyway, so I want to highlight that piece. And I also wanted to talk about what is self-care, and I think Paul, you did a great job of that. Self-care doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing yoga and meditation, but it means that you're doing something that nourishes yourself, that doesn't end up hurting yourself or hurt other people, right? So I also wanted to highlight that. For me, my self-care was, growing up, I played, most of the time, the only time I really left my house as a teenager outside of going to school was to play basketball. So that was my self-care. Music was my self-care. For me to listen to music or write my own rhymes and record them or perform them, that was my self-care. So I wanted to highlight that too. But I think the last thing I wanted to say is oftentimes with young Black men, we look at behaviors and don't see those things as symptoms. So spending all day on the computer, spending all day playing video games, spending all day on the phone. So-and-so, all he cares about is chasing girls. So-and-so smokes too much weed. So-and-so is drinking too much. So-and-so won't go to class. So-and-so is not, living up to his potential. So-and-so, has a great opportunity but isn't going after it. Can't keep a job, has no ambition. All of these things, I just hear mental health, mental health, mental health. That's the first place I go, because that's what the issue is. And so if we're really wanting to, when we see those behaviors, for me, that says to me that the antenna has to go up, and that antenna is ringing out loud that there's a mental health issue here, or some trauma, or likely both. And I also don't want us to think about mental health solely through diagnoses, depression, anxiety, whatnot. I want us to think about it in the terms of wellness. Is this person functioning well in their life, or are they not? So I really want to highlight those pieces because I feel like they're important to have in this conversation, because I think, especially sometimes I see so many parents blaming their children for, bad behaviors and not realizing those are symptoms of something else. And then the young person isn't being supported to deal with whatever it is that they're dealing with, because people are telling them, that they're being blamed for the way that their challenges are manifesting, rather than having those challenges, making space for those things, and providing time and effort and energy into processing. So I think I really want to, there's probably more to say, but I'll leave it there for now.
No, you hit the nail on the head, my brother. I love how you wrap that up. Seeing the symptoms, the things that we will take for granted, and the things that we dismiss as parents, and we know it's not a blame game. And I think everybody got that tonight. It's not about blaming parents. It's not about. It's really about awareness. It's about education and understanding. I think we all understand the system is doing exactly what it was created to do, and we have to now find ways, as a community and as a society, to heal. We've been bleeding while we've been bleeding for decades, for centuries. And how can we continue to make that change? And I am so grateful for the work that you are all doing in your spaces, and even in your daily lives. So on an up note, because we've been going on an up note, and Joan was already saying I'm ready to pay for the toolkit. So we got in some funding, so we have to put the toolkit together. Paul, she called your name, and who inspires you as you move through this space, and as you go out life? Tell me something. I want to know who inspires you, and what is a mantra, or a quote, or a motto that you live by that keeps you uplifted in your self care.
The
And
people who
Asante, you
motivate
didn't,
me.
you didn't want to go last, so you go first now.
All right, who motivates me? People like Donna and Paul, who I very much look up to a lot. So these are people who motivate me. I'm not a celebrity worshiper kind of person. I don't really do that. I've met enough celebrities to know that sometimes the veneer is true and sometimes it's not. But also they're just regular people who are good at things and
Hmm.
good enough that we know who they are. But so I mean, the people who inspire me are honestly the everyday people in my community who are trying to better themselves and better other people. So those are probably my biggest inspirations, and where I draw my admiration from. If we were to talk about maybe something more public facing, in terms of my own life, probably the thing that was the biggest inspiration for me, uh, especially with regard to like dealing with my own challenges, um, the autobiography of Antoine Fisher. It's called Finding Fish.
Mm,
They made a movie out of it with Denzel
yeah,
Washington.
yeah.
That book saved my life. Literally changed the course of my life. My son inspires me because he was the one who really motivated me to get my act together when, I was struggling, and all those symptoms I named earlier. I was involved in probably every single one of them.
Right,
Um,
right.
so those are the people who really inspire me. People like Paul, Donna, you, Nicole, like the people who are just doing the work on the ground and not expecting, accolades or pat on the back for it. In terms of mantra, I have on my phone a thing, and all it says is "keep fighting." So that's my
Mm,
home screen. It's just a black home screen, and in white letters it says "keep fighting." And I also like to think all pain is temporary.
mm.
So you know, you'll kind of I don't know how true that is, but I like to move through the world that way. And for me, that gives me, the resilience I need sometimes.
And I love that your son inspires you. Like that's the biggest inspiration of them all, you know?
Oh,
And
when you see them start to do things that you do, you're like, oh man, I
yeah,
gotta get my thing together because
listen, I
he's
learned,
2
you
years old,
learn,
man. He's holding the spoon the same way I hold the spoon. So.
you learn. You really learn who you are when you watch your children and seeing how they emulated you. And I learned how I was sarcastic when my son started dropping sarcasm at the age of 5. I was like, okay, you got to check yourself before you wreck yourself. And so, Dr. Bailey, I'm calling it is. Don't give me no attitude with your tone of face. You're not scaring me, you know. I know you scare a lot of people, but you're not scaring me tonight.
It's just 10 o'clock past my bedtime.
Hey, hey.
The honestly, Nicole, I'm not feeling very positive right now at this moment.
Mhm.
And so for me, I'm not going to answer the inspiring piece, but what
Answer
motivates?
the question.
Who
No,
inspires you in your life, in
hello,
your
let me
daily
finish.
life?
Compassion. Talk to me.
Answer the question.
Donna has spoken. She's the elder in
Hello.
the room.
So
Okay.
what I am going to say is,
Yes.
is what motivates me. And I
Mm.
think, like Asante, it is literally people like you, Nicole, and the journey that you've gone through. It is Donna and calling me up on the phone to say she doesn't do it so much anymore, but this is what's happening at XYZ place. And you need to know. You need to know that this is what's happening. I will say I used to, so as I told you guys before, I take bus, right? So bus and subway. Um, and as you can see with my face isn't a face that says, come and talk to me. This is what people have shared with me. But I'll be on the subway, I'll be on the bus. And I mean, on a daily basis, somebody who's clearly experiencing some form of mental health distress comes normally and sit down right beside me. I don't know if it's just because I'm sitting at the back of the bus or what, but comes and sit down right beside me and starts a conversation. And after a certain time, for me, it was like, none of this is an accident. There's definitely a reason why these conversations are happening. There's definitely a reason why I met you where I met you, Nicole, where I met Donna, where I met Donna, Asante, where I met Asante, and that, we started to work together in various different spaces around these pieces. So for me, the motivation is literally the people that I meet, the people that I'm working with. And I honestly believe that my steps have been ordered, right? I'm not a Christian in that kind of way, etc. But I really believe that, my steps have been ordered in a way. So I'm on a path. I think in terms of mantra, again, sorry, not as positive as I couldn't find one, but I'm gonna try and flip it. The quote sometimes that I have to remind myself is, yo, don't be a hero. Somebody who's been in community development work said, listen, don't be a hero. Have to remember that it's not just about you alone, that it takes all of us. It literally takes the village. It takes me figuring out how to work with you. I have a role in the piece. Asante or Donna, Nicole have a role in the piece, and we need to figure out how to make it work. So I encourage those, the Anns. I've never met you, Ann, but I've heard a lot about Ann Pottinger. The Sister Gloria, all of those folks. I think it takes really takes a village. So as much as we can, even if it's small conversations like this, just figuring out what's the little step that we can do. So, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
For somebody who wasn't feeling inspiring, you were very inspiring in that piece of talk there. Maybe you need to not feel inspired so you can give someone more of these conversations. Um, and Lady Donna.
It. I echo what they've been saying. There have been so many people in this community that have been so selfless, that have spent years working selflessly for the benefit of the community. I'm not going to name names, but there have been so many people for the last however many years that I see, and they've worked so hard to hold this community up and to just do work. And most of them, like Paul, just do it very quietly, with no ego and no need for accolades, right? just do things just very quietly to benefit the community. And I'm constantly inspired by those people. When I look around, there is no shortage of people out there that, um, you know, in terms of inspiration. They're really, because I see so many of those people that just quietly, they're just doing their things, right? However they, whether it's with the might of their pen, like my acquired son, or other, that use the might of his
Your
pen
son is not
to,
quiet.
because his pen is so mighty, and you just have to put pen to paper, and like,
Yes,
whoa, like,
yes, yes.
But there's so many people like that I'm constantly inspired in awe of. And I think my mantra is always, from the time I was little, it's always the same. The race is not for the swift, nor the battle for the strong. It
Yep.
is for those that can endure to the end. And endure we can, right? And endure we must. And and we do what we do. We run our part of the relay, and when it's our time to hand over the baton to like younger, more energetic people, we hand it over. Paul, that goes for you.
Nobody has energy like you, Donna. Nobody has energy like you. Cool. What is yours?
What is my what?
Your mantra and the inspiring piece.
Uh, the people that inspire me are ordinary people doing extraordinary things like yourself. And when I sit in this space, see, now you're gonna make me cry on my own show because I'm emotional, and I am humbled. Like tonight, I am so humbled by the three of you because I know what you do. And I see the work that you're doing, and that the work that people don't have a clue that you're doing, and the advocacy that you're doing, and the pain that you take, and the stripes. It's like I see like the stripes that you get. People are just hitting you, and yet you still keep pushing forward and pushing forward, knowing what Asante just did in the space of the Reach Out Network, and that the heck was not easy. What you've accomplished in that place, and what you're doing in Speller's Place, and the fact that you're going on, and Donna's not just in SAPACCY and just fighting and pushing no matter what, as tired as you are, and speaking to parents and advocating. And Paul, you've gone from different spaces. So when I sit in that space, outside of my son, the people that are inspire me are the people that are advocating and not looking for the accolades. I'm just in that same space. And my mantra is love is in the details. And that's and let your and your victory speaks. My name, Nicole, means victory of the people. And I'm finally walking into that space where I've always been doing advocacy, but in now in this different way, I want people who are doing the work like you to shout those victories, to show that there are people that are doing the work. And we need to call those names. And I remember when I was working at the Senate, um, our poet laureate at that time, my God, why is his name leaving my head? Our first Black poet laureate. Somebody help me in the chat.
Sure.
Um, he did roll call, and he did a book called Roll Call, and then he started expanding on it, and he just started listing the names of the people. And I remember he would say Nicole, and he would call this different person, and we would just be sending his names because the names are there. So in this Black health space, in this Black mental health space, let's start calling the names. Let's write down the names. And thank you, Danielle, George Elliott Clark. Thank you, Danielle Dowdy. I love you to pieces. And it's people like Danielle that are doing the work behind the scenes. Sarah Oyanga doing the work behind the scenes. Dagmar is on here doing the work and fighting. And that's why I'm here. This space right here is a space of advocacy where we are going to change and affect lives. And we're gonna fortify each other and build strength from each other. When each one of us is feeling tired, we know to pick up the phone or send a text and say, "Hey, how you doing?" Dr. Natisha Massaquoi in the space now at CAMH board. When I'm just thinking Sharon McLeod, when we just have to start calling those names. The Brooke Chambers, calling those names. The Bernice Carnegie, calling those names that are working in this space that people do not know, that just see them doing one thing. And so you asked me the question, and now you have me preaching to the choir. You said you want to go to bed. Now you asked me the question. Jesus. Anyways, I am just happy that you all tuned in. Danielle says she appreciates you all. What a session. Thanks to Paul, Donna, Asante for starting this conversation. Thank you, Joan Pierre, for being an advocate, for being my mentor, for standing in the truth of who you are and always showing up. Uh, Lots of love coming from Danielle and Sarah. Yes, Sarah, time to write a new roll call edition. We need to call Dr. Clark, and we need to call him again, and we need to get it out there. And I blew up that poster at the Senate, man. I didn't care. I blew it up. We're gonna write those names. So for those of you who don't know who I am, well, now you know. I'm Nicole Karen Virginia Waldron. I am the voice of victory and your mental fitness coach. Thank you so much to Donna, Paul, and Asante for showing up and for showing out. Be sure to tune in to what they're doing. Support them when you hear the clarion call that they need funding. We need funding. Can I say that again? We need funding for not just for defunding the police and different things. We need to create the systems. We need some foundational funding. So we're not always acting on the defensive. We need to come from the offensive space. And so thank you for everyone for joining tonight, for staying tuned, for interacting. There were so many of you on tonight: Brian, Louise, Sarah, Serena, Dagmar, Madge, Wendy. I'll call it out. Ann Pottinger, Joan Pierre, Martin Scott Pascal. Those of you, YouTube, I know you're out there because I can see you online, but you haven't dropped too many comments in the chat. Serena, all the way in Washington, D.C., thank you for being, just an avid listener of the Victory Speak show. Norman Marsh, you threw your 10 cents and 20 cents in there. You asked some really great questions. So thank you, Brian Gonzalez, for everyone who showed up. Deborah, Allison, you showed up and you showed out and you engaged and you were part of this conversation. You can catch this conversation on the replay at Victory Speak 7 on YouTube at Victory Speak 7. And tomorrow night is Thursday. I'm going to be on Clubhouse. Friday night, I'm going to be at Speak Up and Empower on this Facebook page, Speak Up and Empower, with the awesome Love More. And then next week, guess who is on the show? Next week, we got Sarah Oyango. Woohoo! From Ottawa. Is okay, let me tell you, people. Hi, Louise. June 7th, it's the 50th show of the Victory Speak show. It's going to be our 50th show. And my guest is going to be Sarah Oyango. I am so excited. Yay! And on the Wednesday, listen, we're talking with fathers. I'm going to have 4 amazing fathers that are going to come in. And we're going to be talking, because we're going to be going into, can you believe we're going into Father's Day? June just started. Oh my God. And we're talking about Father's Day, but we're going to be going with fathers. And yeah, I'm going to be doing that. So stay tuned, remain blessed, continue to let your victory speak. And remember to have an inspired conversation with someone somewhere in your life. And a conversation, all it needs is a smile. And as you always know, I say, love is in the details. Be sure to let your victory speak. This is Nicole Waldron. And, I'm thanking my guests, Paul. Paul is gone somewhere into the wilderness. Asante and Donna for, tuning in tonight, for being part of the Victory Speak show. And, let your victory speaks, guys. Thank you. Good night.